Good afternoon, everyone. We're here for the Investment Advisory Committee meeting. Treasurer Cromas, do you want to do the call to order, a roll call, I mean?
Certainly, I will do that. Councilman Sharon? Here. I am here. Present. And
Here, thank you.
we have a quorum.
Okay, first up, we have public comments. Is anyone here for a public comment?
We have
Welcome.
Sean Abbott-Tofter.
Welcome.
And just to clarify, am I going to be on the clock here?
Yes, 3 minutes.
2 minutes or 3 minutes?
Do we have the policy?
All right. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Oh, it's zipped up. It does say two.
Yeah, I just need a second. Yeah.
He's just got to adjust it, yeah. There we go.
Good afternoon.
My name is Sean Abbott Clafter. I'm a resident of Cuyahoga County, and I have come to address the Investment Advisory Committee regarding several points regarding your foreign investments in Israel bonds. I want to discuss some of the sanctions that the Biden administration has issued against individuals and organizations in the West Bank, some of the legal risks that that raises for the county and our financial institutions. I want to talk about your fiduciary responsibility to the county and some of the reputational harm that we are currently causing with these investments. So we'll submit a longer report later. Obviously, I have only a few minutes to talk right now, so I can't run through all of the sanctions and the details therein, but I'll read a few words about that, and then I'll move on to the other topics. So the U.S. government's executive orders and FinCEN advisories highlight sanctions against individuals and entities engaged in violent activities in the West Bank. This includes Israeli extremist settlers whose financial support could be indirectly tied to funds raised through various channels, including bonds. Counties investing in Israel bonds could face legal risks if their investments are perceived as indirectly funding activities that threaten peace or stability, potentially leading to sanctions compliance issues. The nonprofit Democracy for the Arab World Now has documented how money flows from the Israeli treasury to illegal settlement outposts, including outposts owned by individuals sanctioned by the U.S. government. Because Israel bonds does not restrict Israel's use of the funds, and the Israeli government does not segregate the funding it receives from Israel bonds, there is no way for Israel bonds to ensure that its funds are not being used in violation of the Biden administration's executive orders regarding sanctions. Secondly, I want to talk about fiduciary responsibility quickly. You all know that as fiduciaries of the county, you must carefully evaluate the risks associated with the economic and political landscape of Israel, particularly as it relates to their obligation under U.S. law. Israel is currently facing substantial challenges, including increasing geopolitical instability, a weakening economy, and a deteriorating currency. As fiduciaries, the Investment Advisory Board is legally obligated to manage these risks and ensure that public funds are invested in a way that prioritizes the best interest of taxpayers. Since August, all three of the national credit ratings agencies in the U.S. have downgraded Israel's credit rating and assigned a negative outlook to Israel's future credit worthiness, a point that our meter friends have made in the past. As such, the fiduciary duty of the IAC requires prudence in managing public funds. The economic, political, and reputational risks associated with further investments in Israel bonds suggest that ceasing investing in these bonds is the most responsible course of action. By doing so, the county would fulfill its obligations to act in the best interests of its beneficiaries, the taxpayers, by choosing more stable, reliable investments. Thank you.
Thank you. No other public comments?
We also have public comment from Mohammed Faraj. He's still in the room? He is not here.
That's it? Okay. Next, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes.
Just
Oh,
for
sorry.
point of order, did he sign in?
I signed him in.
No, that's why I asked the question. Did he sign in? Okay.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from July 24th, 2024. Does anyone have any comments?
Madam Chair, I was in attendance. I just want to add my name to the minutes from.
Sure, no problem. Any other comments? Okay, I move we approve these minutes. Can I have a second?
Second.
Should I do a call?
I think we just do voice vote.
Okay. All in favor, say
Aye.
aye. All opposed? Okay, thank you. Moving on to fund and portfolio. Jed, is this you, or are we moving on to the Jason?
This is me. I'm waiting
Okay.
for
Sure,
the,
we'll wait
for
for
the
the screen to
slides to
roll
sync
up.
up with where we're at. Two more pages down, I think. It'll be a slideshow.
There we go.
On this first slide is a summary of where the funds of the county are currently held. So we see that the first section there are their bank deposits. That's what we use for our operating funds. Funds that we do not need for immediate operations are swept over to our money market fund at Star Ohio. So we can get a little better interest rate. And then as we need those funds for operations, we'll pull money from that account. The next section there are the investments accounts. So you see the breakdown, high-level breakdown of the various U.S. agencies, U.S. Treasuries, the different classifications of investments that we currently hold. Meter will, of course, be going into much more detail on the investment environment that we find ourselves in. And then at the bottom there, you see the non-general funds for other kind of projects, namely the opioid fund, and then a basket of development projects that are funded. So the Star Ohio opioid accounts, those are what's going to fund the Opioid Diversion Center for about the next 2 years. There are some other outstanding projects within the opioid fund that are to be determined. And then on the next slide, we have the structured bond investments for the opioid fund. So this is things beyond the next 2 years or so. We structure those so that it can fund the diversion center with maturing bonds every month. And then as we get more funds, as we get the coupon payments and matured bonds, those are reinvested the 5-year time horizon to, again, fund the diversion center for the foreseeable future. The last bond we purchased for the opioid fund was yielding about 4.3%. So locking those in over 5 years in our high interest rate environment just gives us a better financial footing to fund that diversion center. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier the Star Ohio account. This is the graph showing the interest we've earned over the last few years, as well as what it was earning at the end of last quarter. This morning, we were yielding about 5.2% overnight, with about 24.5-day maturity. Any questions about this? If not, then I'll turn it over to Meter.
Perfect. I will go ahead and jump in. If you just flip ahead to, it'll be slide 2. There you go. So a little high-level overview of just what we're seeing out there from an economic perspective today. Really, these are the 5 main factors that we're looking at on a day-to-day basis when we're evaluating positioning within the portfolio. From the Fed funds standpoint, we had our first 0.5% cut from the Fed last month. Right now, looking for 2 more from the Fed by the end of this year. From both the market and the Fed standpoint. We'll see a lot can change very quickly, but that right now is the outlook. From the rates side of things, inflation continues to fall. We're right around 2.7% now off our highs of 5.6%. So that's continued, but again, we'll go into a little more in depth on each one of these things and how that actually plays out today. Growth, it's been extremely strong. Last quarter was a big surprise to the upside, being over a 3% GDP rate. Employment, again, these historical low numbers, 4.1%. So all in, pretty firm from an economic standpoint today. Now, digging in a little deeper, taking a look at from the Fed funds. So, one of the things we always like to look at is what's the Fed saying, what's the market actually think. Right now, they are remarkably close. Both are saying that we are going to be headed south from here, so having some cuts. Both are agreeing it's probably going to be 2. Right now, we're thinking that would probably be 0.25% in November, 0.25% in December. With some of the strong numbers that have come out, it seems unlikely that the Fed would continue with another 0.5% increase, as that doesn't really seem warranted, but we really could see that slow and steady. Right now, all projections, as you can see from this chart, really when we're looking at the end of 2025, looking to be approximately 6 rate cuts between now and then. So again, positioning the portfolio, as Jed said, talking about continuing to lock in some of these longer rates, take advantage of those with the future cuts looming. On the inflation front, while we've gotten down, had a nice decrease from our peaks, core PCE being on the top, this is really what the Fed's focused on. It got as high as almost 6%, down to the 2.68% today. CPI being one of the big headline numbers that you see a lot of times. That's the one that got up over 9%, down at 2.5%, which seems like a big decrease, and it is from where we were. But really, when you hear about inflation, the pain people are still feeling on this front, even though we're down and we've really gotten stuck in this mid-2s and not sure what's going to happen to break free from that level. But we're still 20% higher than we were pre-COVID. So that's where you get into wages haven't kept up with what we've seen from the inflation front. So that's really where you're hearing a lot of the pain people are feeling from the inflation. When wages aren't keeping up with that inflation over the longer term, makes it much more difficult on people out there, the day-to-day consumers. From the growth standpoint, though, again, we talked about the surprise to the upside for last quarter, 3%, great number to see. One of the big things you'll see those survey the estimates going out into next year on the right-hand side. This has been the big surprise because we heard a ton of talk about recession that's coming. Now you're hearing more headlines about the recession that never was, as it seems that we may be getting closer to a soft landing. We'll see. Right now, a lot of the growth that we're seeing is really coming from both federal spending and then high-income households have continued to spend. So that's what you've seen propping up a lot of the economy out there. We do see credit cards are still at record highs again, so there are some things that could be worrisome if the economy does take a turn. But right now, all the outlook looking into 2025 is very, very strong for the economy, especially relative to where it was this time last year.
Jason, do you happen to know I know we said we had a surprise to the upside the last quarter. Has that been pretty consistent over the past cycle, or is that something, as we've started to cool down, it's not cooling as fast as we thought? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we have been seeing revisions upward, has been more the trend than not. We haven't seen as big of a surprise upward as what we did last quarter, though. But certainly, it hasn't been quite as bad as what we thought. But especially when you get into the estimates, the surveys, because we were looking at, for 2024, less than 1% GDP was what the projection was in 2023, which that's where, when you saw the numbers that we've seen between the 1.6, the 3%, those have really been a big surprise compared to what we were projecting back in 2023.
Jason, the Star Ohio doesn't look like it's started to move down very much in regards to with the Fed, even with the Fed's going a half and with the 2 quarters coming down. How long do you think we can expect to see Star Ohio is going to stay there?
Yeah, right now it's dropped. The peak was just shy of 5.6%.
Right.
And now we're at 5.08. So we're about that full 0.5% off. So it's really felt the whole full cut, which really with the weighted average maturity of Star, it is going to take about, every cut we get, it's going to be about a month before it feels that full effect.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So on the employment side, we did see job growth slowing earlier this year, but the last several months, we've added 200,000 jobs per month over the last 3 months. So that's been nice to see that perk up. That was one of the big things that has really been the impetus for, okay, maybe the Fed needs to slow down a little bit with some of these jobs numbers surprising. But really from the unemployment standpoint, still at 4.1%, historically very, very low. You know, we're up a little bit from the lows that were 3.4%, but still in a very strong position from the job standpoint.
Can you talk about any particular sectors where you're seeing that?
I don't have anything in particular that I've seen on that front. Our investment guys could dig in certainly a lot deeper on that front. But I know it's been really across the board, because if we look back, even getting into the COVID side of things, there was a big difference between when you got into the industrials versus service sectors, and all of those have remained pretty strong through this. We haven't really seen one fall off more than the other at this point. Taking a quick look at the regional side of things, again, Cuyahoga County continues to be very strong. Ticked back down where it had gotten up just above the Ohio and national averages as of the last reading, has ticked down below. And then taking a quick look at yields, as we had that cut, we have seen rates drop immediately, which you would expect. The orange line being Fed funds, blue line being the 2-year. As we said, right now, still looking to lock in these rates longer term, hang on to them as long as we can. Especially relative to the longer term averages, you know, going back to 2004, the average 2-year yield is 1.9%. So when we're still right around 4%, still a great yield to be locking in. And that's a big part of the strategy moving forward, is to go ahead and take care of hanging on to that interest income as long as we can. So with that, any questions on the economic side before we dive into the portfolio?
Thank you, Jason. I will transition us over into the portfolio review, both the core and the opioid settlement fund, starting first on the slide on the screen, slide number 10 for the packets in front of you. Just to give a quick summary of the overall core portfolio as of the end of the third quarter, the total portfolio stood at just over $942 million, more or less in line with the prior quarter. The one point of note here is we have been building some cash within the portfolio just to make sure that we have enough buffer to meet any of the encumbrances that will come up through Q4, but in regular communication with the team in order to get that into the proper place. And then once released, those funds will be deployed into the portfolio according to the current investment strategy. Moving into the middle left of the page, the portfolio at the end of the quarter stood at a weighted average maturity of just over 2.5 years, 2.54 to be exact. That is up slightly as we continue to deploy the securities out further along the curve, again, within the limits of the investment policy of the county, up from 2.42 years at the end of the prior quarter. The yield actually jumped nicely, contrary to what we see on the shorter end of the curve, the Star Ohio communication or conversation we just had. We are at 3.01, so eclipsing the 3% mark for the first time in some time. As of the end of the prior quarter, we stood at 2.8% on the overall portfolio, so up nicely from there. Puts the estimated annual income, again, just for the core portfolio, at just over $27.7 million in estimated annual income over the next 12 months. Shifting over to the upper right, focus in the big changes within the portfolio as we are deploying those securities out longer along the yield curve. Where we've seen the increases, we've been focusing in on U.S. Treasuries, corporate bonds, and municipal securities. That's where all of the reinvestments have occurred within those spaces. But overall, the allocation remains very similar to the prior quarter. And then the maturity distribution below, again, very similar to what it was in the prior quarter. You'll see that continued emphasis out into that 4 to 5 year space as we look to lock in yields for as long as we possibly can according to the investment policy. I'll pause there for any questions from the committee. Okay. Shifting over to the next slide, just looking at the historical, again, we're up, ended the year at a weighted average maturity, ended 23, I'm sorry, at a 2.55. We are right in line with that 2.55 at 2.54. And the overall yield, as I just described before, at a 3.01, up from the 2.52% that the portfolio was yielding at the end of 23. The compliance review of the portfolio, all investments within the portfolio remain within their required allocations. The quarterly comparison page, this is the one I'll just note. Coming out of our prior quarter's meeting, we had referenced another comparative or comparable of more looking at the 5 year. We still have the established benchmark according to the policy of the overall county's portfolio, which is the average of the 2 year constant maturity treasury. And as we look through the portfolio, again, the 3.01 number that's been referenced multiple times, the legacy benchmark, so the county's actual benchmark, that average of the 2 year treasury at a 4.51. But again, that overall weighted average maturity being much lower than the county's core investment portfolio. We have incorporated the 0 to 5 year U.S. Treasury, which gives a much more representative look of maturities, again, from daily all the way out to the 5 year maximum that we employ today.
And just for reference, this is shown on
The extra page that was handed out.
It was not in at the time that we turned this in.
So at the 2.43 on the 0 to 5 year benchmark or index that we're looking at. And then Star Ohio that we referenced, which has an end of period overnight yield of 5.08. Questions on any of the comparison? Okay. Transitioning over to the opioid settlement portfolio, The size of the portfolio, again, very steady from the prior quarter, just under $63 million. The weighted average maturity, again, stands at right about 3 years, 2.91 to be exact. The yield has climbed as well up to 3.41, up from a 3.32, ending the prior quarter, putting the estimated annual income for this portfolio at just over $2.1 million. The allocation within this portfolio being held primarily to U.S. government treasuries and U.S. government agency securities. Again, very, very similar to the prior quarter allocation, and a small allocation to corporate notes there as well. As Jed referenced earlier, what is happening within this portfolio is when we have maturities, in working with the county, we have all agreed that we feel it's best to go out and reinvest any maturities that are not currently needed into the 5-year space to lock in those yields and produce that income for as long as we can, knowing that we are well within this declining rate environment, expected declining rate environment.
And how much is been allocated or identified for the diversion center of these funds?
All of it is for diversion center. Details about probably about 3 or 4 million.
And we have a budget for the diversion center that causes us to, pardon? That's gonna absorb that entire amount? Based on that return, it sounds like we should be able to live off the earnings off of it without touching the principal ever. So how's it gonna get consumed? Maybe I'm missing something. Okay, so, but that assumes that we're not gonna get any more efficient on our operations.
Well, the goal remains to make the money last as long as possible, right? So we can't really predict what costs are gonna look like in the future or any of those sorts of things, but we are doing what we can to make sure that this is, you know, managed in as efficient a way as possible to extend that horizon line. But yeah, to your point, it should last.
The other half of the equation of consuming is the operation, so. It always gives me concern when you don't look at both halves of the equation.
It's more on Brandy though, right? Any other questions?
In the final page, I'll just refer to, again, the compliance review. All investments within the opioid settlement fund, again, remain within the required compliance standards. Concludes my comments. I'll open up to any questions.
Yeah, when you do corporate bonds, and you select a bond, what research do you go into in regards to that organization's business model, what they do, how they invest their money, how they sell their products, things of that nature?
Yeah, we undertake a full credit review of all. So we start first with the entire universe, which would be limited by the specifics of Ohio Revised Code, as well as the county's investment policy. So we have specific credit restrictions there. We then take that narrowed universe and we restrict it further by way of full credit overview and credit review process, that we have an approved issuer list that we will recommend and or purchase within our client portfolio. In each of those credits, we continue to monitor and regularly review to ensure that they remain viable investments within.
We have 4 folks who all they do is credit research for us. So they're looking through, what's going on in the industry, what's happening, what's going on from the geographic region that might be affecting what's happening. When we're looking at management, is there turnover at the top? What's the management's trying to, are they in a growth mode and they're taking on debt? Are they trying to maintain status quo? What's going on there within that? Then you get into all the liquidity metrics day to day. So it's very, very thorough, in-depth analysis of all of these. You want to make sure that even Ohio Revised Code keeps you in very, very high quality, and that we're in the highest quality of those high quality.
So if I understand it correctly, your analysis is a financial analysis that looks at the value of the credit. Is it gonna perform? Is it gonna pay a rate that's comparable? And is it going to result in us not having to worry about whether the funds are gonna, based on the rate that's being paid, about that?
Yeah, are there any other risks outside of the dollars and cents sign that might put that at higher risk?
Do you go into the analysis of what the products are that this corporation might be selling, or who they sell it to, or who their customer base is, and whether or not it's going into healthcare, for example? Do you look into the in-depth of what goes on their revenue side of how they're selling their product?
We definitely look at the revenues side of things and where it's going. And with that, it's a lot more peer-to-peer analysis. So within the healthcare space, how are they stacking up against others in the healthcare, and their distribution, stronger, weakening, what are their trends within that? That's where we see a little bit more. We don't get into necessarily a judgment on the product and what we think of it and its viability type of thing. It's more what's their distribution, how have they been performing.
You're not looking at the individual organization as to what products they sell, and only whether or not they're doing a good job in their sector that they've identified.
Correct. We won't.
Not whether it's a good sector or a bad sector. You're not.
Yeah, well, we do look at sectors that we like.
Okay.
And we'll decide if we like healthcare versus, and maybe we'll say, we're out of healthcare in general right now. But we won't look at, Pfizer came out with a new XYZ drug. Do we think that's viable or not? Predictions on that. It's more about what they actually have out there. Sales have been. Have they been strong? Are there anything changing that we should?
Sounds like primarily financial modeling.
That is 90% plus of it.
I just want to make sure that's
Yeah.
clear as to what you're looking at.
Yes, we are doing financial credit in terms of looking at ability to pay back. That is really the first and foremost review point. So going into full financial, but as Jason said, these other general factors do come into play, but there is not an individual viability assessment of each and every product that is distributed or sold by any of the individual credits themselves.
And the rate of return fluctuates based on some of those analysis. You might get a higher rate of return over something, you might have a slightly higher risk, or vice versa.
Yes, but remember, under both Ohio Revised Code and policy, it is highly restricted as to the credit that can be purchased within the portfolio. So we aren't talking about stretching down outside, even into, we're not getting into junk territory or even lower credit territory. These are all high credits, first and foremost, looking at any of the major credit rating agencies. So the yield comparable within credit sectors, we are looking at that and looking for the best opportunity for yield, but also looking at the spreads as they apply to U.S. government treasuries and agencies. So looking for, are we being compensated for going out and taking on the individual credit of any named company, ABC, XYZ? Is the spread there worthwhile in order to merit investment into that specific?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'd like to move acceptance of the report as presented.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our linked deposits. assuming this is turning over to you, Brad,
Yeah,
for
that's
a
right.
presentation.
Presentation is probably too strong a word. I just wanted to give the committee an update on where things stand with that. We've been having conversations about revamping our help loan program, to do a couple of different things to expand to offer small business opportunities within that. Those conversations are ongoing with banking partners and the housing and community development folks within the county. So the horizon line on that continues to be pushed out a little bit because the onboarding process for our banks is proving to be a lengthier kind of effort than I think we initially anticipated. But I just wanted to make sure you knew that we were still working on that. Hopefully sometime in 2025, we'll have an announcement to make on that. In the intervening period, the help loan remains available through Key and through Huntington and First Federal of Lakewood. And then also the Heritage Home Program, which is also a linked deposit program, remains available for borrowers if they're interested in pursuing reduced rates.
Any questions?
The only one that would be on the waiting that, it's obviously gotten some publicity as far as linked deposits and the institutions. Where are we standing on trying to find, is there a magic number or balance of what we're looking for on those public activities by the various banks, and where one, we might tip the scale and say, okay, yes, we want to weight it based on their community involvement?
Yeah, it sort of sits outside of the conversation around community reinvestment. It's part of it, but it's a very small part of it. And the sticking points are, which loan products make sense? Do they need to create a new loan product? That's a much bigger lift, obviously, for a financial institution. Or are there things in their existing portfolio that make sense within that? So those are the conversations we're having. I've also engaged the Treasurer of State's office because they're in the process of revamping all of their linked deposit programming to see if there might be, additional opportunities for partnership with them or models we could follow. So all of those conversations remain ongoing.
And some of the institutions are, or at least as they're presenting it, is not just a dollar flow going into a particular activity like housing. For example, they also say, hey, we're also doing these other civic activities with mobile banks and things of that nature where they're going in the inner city. And I don't know whether we have a scaling process where we actually try and score those different activities. I know that there's some folks who want to link it just to the housing, but there are other activities I think that we need to make sure that we look at all of our local banks, because some do a good job on the one and maybe not necessarily as good a job on the other.
Yeah, that conversation around community reinvestment is really more aligned with the banking contract conversation, and that's a different kind of line than this committee is set up to converse about, but I know those conversations are ongoing too.
Yeah, well, I just want to make sure there's a common, at least some common elements, because the banks see themselves as being multifaceted in that.
Yeah, and to your point, I think what Brad's seeing is this, banks are interested in one, whether it's small businesses, because they already have something set up, or housing,
Yeah.
because that's what they're working on, and that's where their strength lies.
And sometimes the media only picks up one component. It's, oh, they're scoring really high here, but they aren't picking up on, like what you're talking about, Madam Chair, in regards to that.
Anything else? Okay. No other business?
Nothing further?
Okay, we adjourn.
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Hi. Hey, Brandy,